Tonight I will be telling some true horror stories from around the internet. Stories of late night drives, stalkers, home intruders, and more. These are real encounters involving real people, so this is a fair warning that these topics could be triggering to some. If you have a story you'd like to have shared with the channel, it can be submitted to reddit.com/r/slumberreads. Stay safe out there, and as always, I hope you all have a great night. To preface this, I love to drive. Like, hours-long drives to nowhere with no destination in mind. Just me, my music, and the road ahead of me. Living in Nebraska, I'd often take back roads or lonely highways cutting through the countryside to small towns and eventually cities. And I'd usually take these drives at night since there was less traffic to worry about. I've done it since I got my license 4 or 5 years ago, and I've never once had any sort of issue. Nor have I ever run into any trouble. That was until a few nights ago. For reference, I'm a relatively small 22-year-old female, and as I've stated before, I often take these drives completely and utterly alone. They're a good way to clear my head when I'm stressed, upset, or overwhelmed, or for me to get a plan together to sort personal issues out. I've always done these long and lonely drives to get away from the toxicity of my household when I used to live with my parents as a means of coping with their alcoholism. Though now that I've moved out and am in a much better place mentally, I don't really have the urge to get in my car and just drive anymore. However, on the night this event took place, I was feeling pretty overwhelmed, stressed, and anxious with a clusterfuck of personal issues I'd rather not get into. I felt restless and irritable around my boyfriend, couldn't focus on anything else, and decided I would take a drive to clear my head. My boyfriend was understanding and told me to be careful and not be gone for too terribly long, since it was getting pretty late. I agreed, gave him a kiss goodbye, and left. I drove around our city for about 30 minutes, but I was still feeling on edge about everything transpiring in my personal life, so I decided to drive further north down those familiar, dark, winding one-lane highways. I kept the car at a steady 65 miles per hour, taking the turns at a slower pace in case a deer jumped out around the bend, and was just admiring the vast, empty darkness of the snow-capped fields and barren trees. It was honestly a bit creepy being all alone with no cars in sight. In seemingly the middle of nowhere, the few houses miles back from the road lightless, and the dead cornfields withered away and covered in the snow. It was like something out of a horror movie, and I half expected to see a ghost pop up in my rearview mirror, or see someone clamber out from the patches of trees dotting the horizon. The only light came from my headlights, and even then I still strained to see through the inky darkness of the night. By now, it was just after 11, and I told myself that once I made the familiar roundabout that would either take you to a small town or back up towards the city, I would head back to the city and home. That roundabout was still maybe 15 to 25 minutes away, but other than my imagination picturing the worst, I wasn't really all that concerned. I mean, I was by myself. I didn't have any other motorists to worry about, right? Wrong. As I'm rounding another bend, I notice a vehicle with its hazard lights flashing maybe a quarter of a mile or something away from me. It was some sort of sedan, dark colored, and was angled to where only part of it was on the shoulder while the rest was jutted out onto the road. Like they had to pull over in a hurry but didn't quite manage to do that. The driver's side door was flung wide open, and as I slowed my vehicle down and angled it towards the opposite side of the road to pass, I could make out what looked like maybe blood on the inside of the open door. I didn't see anyone on the road or in the car, and I was the only motorist in sight. Cell phone reception is spotty at best in this part of the country, but more often than not, you couldn't get reception no matter how hard you prayed, which was definitely the case when I took a glance at my phone to see if I had any service. So, a lone female on the road, at night, pulling up near a vacant vehicle that looks like someone had been attacked on the inside with no cell service. Now, I'm no dummy. I've watched countless episodes of Investigation Discovery and Criminal Minds and read far too many true crime books to know that this had bad and danger written all over it. But there was still a small part of me that worried something terrible had happened to whoever was in that vehicle, and I thought I needed to help. These roads don't get a lot of traffic late at night, and temperatures were well below freezing. If someone were hurt or in trouble, there was no one and nothing else to help them but me. Still, I pulled on the side of caution. I was still driving my car, though a bit more slowly, and as I approached the vehicle, I rolled down my passenger window a bit, shut off the music, and called out. "Hey, anyone there? Are you okay?" I didn't hear a response. I worried they were passed out somewhere, but I wasn't about to get out and look for them. I told myself I'd call out one last time, and if I didn't hear anything, I would leave, and the moment there was reception, I'd call it in. And if I did hear someone, well, I'd figure out my next course of action then. So, again I shout, "Hey, what happened? Are you okay?" There was silence for a beat, and then I heard rustling in the shadows of the trees, followed by a gruff voice saying, "Yeah." I was relieved at first and was about to say something in response, or possibly even stop my car and get out, when I noticed three things nearly simultaneously. As I inched my way past the front of the sedan, I noticed there was no damage to the hood or anywhere else on the vehicle, which I found to be strange considering the blood on the inside of the door. In my rearview mirror, I caught a glance of someone coming out from behind the sedan, and they were making their way towards my car fast. The person did not have any blood on them, or appeared injured in any way, wearing a mask, not like a face mask for COVID, or a ski mask or anything normal, but one of those masks you would see in the Purge movies, and they were holding something in their hand. I don't know what it was. I couldn't get a good look, but from its length and shape, my guess was maybe a tire iron or a crowbar or something. I don't need to tell you that I slammed on the gas the moment I noticed those things, and drove like a bat straight out of hell, my heart thundering in my chest and my entire body shaking. The window was still rolled down in my haste, and the music was still shut off, so I could very clearly hear someone, definitely a man, shouting at me, though I had no clue what they were saying. I just knew I had to get out of there immediately. I stole one last look in my rearview mirror as I drove away, mostly to see if they were getting in their sedan to follow chase, or if they had stopped. The man with the weapon was still standing in the middle of the road watching me, and right before I looked away from the mirror, I saw a second man emerge from the trees that had been rustling earlier, also wearing one of those creepy masks and no trace of blood on him. I probably broke every law for speeding that night, but I wanted to get as far away from those men as possible. As soon as I made it to the roundabout, I turned towards town, parked in the Walmart parking lot that thankfully still had cars from who I assumed were workers closing up shop, and proceeded to have a full-on meltdown. When I could pull myself together, I called one of my friends, T, who was a police officer, to tell him what happened and ask what I should do. He was concerned for me, and after asking if I was okay, where I was, did they follow me, etc., he told me since it was out of city limits, he couldn't do much on his end, but he could get in contact with the local police/sheriff in that jurisdiction to make my statement and check it out. I agreed, thanked him, and while I waited for police to show up, I called my boyfriend. Through my hysteric sobs and panic, I managed to tell him what happened not even 10 or so minutes ago. He was, as you could imagine, super freaked for my safety and wanted me to either come home immediately or drive down himself to take me home. I told him the police were on their way to take my statement, so I couldn't leave, and that I was okay. But I stayed on the phone with him until I saw the familiar police cruisers pulled into the lot. I gave the police my statement, and they assured me they would go back to the spot I told them the sedan had been to take a look, and that they would try to catch the guys who didn't, though with no cameras, and no description of the man. I wasn't sure they'd be able to. I didn't even get the license plate number, though At the time of my panic, the thought never came to mind until the police were asking if I got it. All they had to go off of was a dark-colored sedan and two guys with masks. After I gave my statements, I went home and stayed curled up close to my boyfriend the whole night, listening to every sound the house made in fear it would be those guys arriving any minute to finish whatever it was they started. Since the incident, I haven't heard back from police about whether or not they have any leads. And I'm not sure they ever will. I'm just thankful I'm still here, and that I didn't stop my car or get out. I'm not sure what would have become of me if I had. I still have so many questions that have no answers. What were they doing? Why? Was that blood on the inside of the car, or just a ruse to get more attention? If it really was blood, did they hurt someone else? What would have happened to me if I had stopped my car? Needless to say, I won't be going on any more late-night drives to anywhere, and I hope I never cross paths with those freaks again. This is something that happened to me 5 or so years ago. I was fresh out of university with my degree in international development. I wanted to help underserved communities, develop meaningful projects, and see more of the world. I was young. I was naive, eager to get started. I took one of the first jobs that offered me a position. It wasn't something I necessarily wanted to do, but it was adjacent to my interests and, more importantly, took me to a place I'd never been before. I loved everything when I arrived. It was beautiful, sunny, and green. My new coworkers, all local staff, were amazing and so kind. My boss invited me to play soccer on Sundays with his family. My fellow project coordinator would go out dancing with me on the weekends. My roommate, a fellow expat working in development as well, was a fun and spunky woman I adored. I felt so blessed. Then one day, it changed. I was walking downtown with a friend. There was a vegetable and fruit market that had great, fresh produce directly from the farmers growing it. It was about a 20-minute bus ride from my apartment, so not close, but not incredibly far either. My friend and I loaded up and began walking over to a quiet corner to call a cab to help us haul our goods back. Then I heard it. Hey, miss. Insert my exact address here. It took me a second to realize he was shouting my address. I turned around to see a man hanging out of his car, slowly crawling along the road with us. My friend recognized my address too. She turned to me and asked, "Do you know him?" I'd never seen him before. He kept shouting, "Yeah, you. You were living in the back house, on the second floor, right?" That made it even worse. I lived on a big suburban lot with 2 houses. One in the front, where my landlady and her family lived, and the second in the back. The second house was split into 2 apartments. The bottom floor housed 2 students, while I lived on the second floor with my roommate. You couldn't see the second house from the road, much less the stairway that led to the second floor. My heart was pounding. I wanted to shout back at the guy, but I was scared. I was a 22-year-old woman living in a foreign country, and I didn't want to draw attention. I didn't know how people would react. I didn't know how he would react. So we walked. My friend tried to comfort me, saying that maybe he knew my landlady's family. I was probably the only redhead in the whole country. He could be a neighbor I hadn't met. The encounter didn't leave me. It stayed in my mind. A week or so passed and I stopped glancing behind my back whenever a car drove by. I started to feel secure. Then he showed up again. I was walking home from work. It was getting dark. My office was a 15 to 20 minute stroll from my apartment. Perfect as a quick way to stretch my legs. I was halfway home when I felt someone watching me. Then, the slow crawl of a car sliding up beside me. I knew it was him without looking. "Miss," insert my address here again, he said, leaning out of his window, one hand on the wheel. Why you shy?" I ignored him and kept walking. There was no one around, and it was getting dark. "Come on," he said. "Let me give you a ride. I know where you live." Not reassuring. I started to feel my chest tighten. I wanted to call someone, but didn't know what he'd do if I reached for my phone. I was practically jogging now, but he just sped up to match my pace. "Listen, bitch." And now he was angry, his voice hard. "You don't just ignore a man like that." I wondered what I'd do if he stopped the car. He looked fit, young. He could probably catch me. He could hurt me. So I did something that, in retrospect, seemed absolutely bizarre. I yelled at him, wildly, rabidly. I did it in my first language, not what they spoke in this country. Not a language he would have ever heard, probably. I screamed curse words and threats, anything I could think of. I'll never forget the confused fury on his face, but he did slow down, letting me run ahead. I could see a woman at a bus stop at the intersection ahead. If I got to her, maybe she'd help. Maybe he'd get scared off. By the time I got to the woman, he was gone. I kept walking home, looking behind me with every step. I told my roommate about what had happened. She told me not to bother reporting it to the police, since they were corrupt and wouldn't do anything. When I told my boss, he told me the same. He said he had a baseball bat and would come whenever I called. I saw the man again 2 weeks later. He was sitting in his car, parked in front of the gates to my apartment. I had been about to take out the trash, but retreated before he could see me. I told my landlady, and when she went over to confront him, he drove off. This continued for weeks. Not every day, but once or twice a week. He was always there, waiting. I took cabs to and from work. I never traveled alone. I barely slept, waiting for him to break in and kill me. My last weekend abroad, he almost did. I went out drinking with a group of my friends, 4 of us in total. We were celebrating the end of my contract, and I was happy to go home in a few days. I couldn't wait to see my family. I couldn't wait to put an ocean between me and the man. We had beers at a local bar, a 5 to 10 minute walk max from my apartment. When it started to get late, around 1, we tried to get a cab, but it was impossible. The roads were jammed and people were everywhere outside. Cabs couldn't even get to us. So we thought, even though others warned us not to, let's walk home. It would be faster than calling a cab. We'll be fine. We're a group of 4. No one will hassle us. We got halfway there when we had to cross a main road. There were no street lights. Not that kind of place. The road was absolutely empty, not a single car in sight. We crossed the road. A few more minutes, but then we were backlit with the bright headlights of a car coming up. We glanced back. A cop car, 2 men in the front, and I knew, even though I couldn't see from the bright lights in my eyes, he was driving. He was a fucking cop. The Jeep slowed, as I knew it would. He rolled down the window to drawl. "Hey, miss." Insert my address for a 3rd time. "Nice night, yeah?" My friends immediately knew who he was. I could see how nervous they were. We were alone on a dark, empty street in the middle of the night. They were cops, so they were armed. No one would intervene, probably. Too dangerous. "You girls need a ride?" He leered. His friend, who I could see now, was grinning hugely. My last few days, I thought, and this is how it ends. We sped up our pace. I don't know what our plan was, other than to get away. Then I heard one of the doors to the Jeep open as the passenger jumped out. I don't think I've ever been so scared in my life, although I didn't dare turn back to see. We were at the turn to my street now. 2 minutes more to get to safety. The car was right behind us. Whoever had gotten out of the car was right behind us. 2 of my friends were ahead now, while another clutched my hand and dragged me along. Then, Out of nowhere, another car appeared. They were coming from the opposite direction, illuminating us all. When they slowed to see what was going on, I've never been so grateful. It was an older couple and they looked concerned. I think they knew something very bad was about to happen. I heard, not saw, the car door swing open. I almost got hit as they sped past us in a hurry. The other car stayed, watching. They offered to escort us home, driving alongside just in case. But I knew he wouldn't come back. Not tonight. I still took a cab with my friends to their place for the night. We took my roommate with us just in case. Nothing happened after that. My last 2 days were uneventful, although I couldn't shake the feeling that he might show up at any given moment. Driving to the airport, all packed up and ready to go home, my cab got pulled over by a cop. My stomach dropped. I couldn't breathe. It wasn't him, although it could have been. It wasn't until I got on the plane, until I landed in my home country, that I finally felt the terror leave me. I still get nervous when cars drive up behind me, when men roll down their windows to shout at me. It's never him, but still, you never know. This happened a few years ago, and sometimes I still have nightmares where I didn't manage to get away. Let me start off by saying, I live in a pretty big city, lots of bars and clubs, and I have experience with partying and drugs. I have been in blackout drunk situations, and this was not that. I no longer go out on my own. That night, I decided to go out with some friends bar hopping. I mainly knew only one of the girls that I hung out with on the regular. The other two were more acquaintances or strangers. I was very outgoing and loved meeting people, so that was nothing new for me. We had a few drinks at a bar and continued on to the next one. Having fun. A great time. One of the girls I didn't know well pulled out the party stuff sometime during our second bar visit. I decided to skip it because I wasn't looking to get effed up that night. My friend said yes, and she and the third girl went to the bathroom. The second girl, let's call her Barb, kept saying I should go with the two others. I declined and declined. She got a little aggressive and mean after the third time I declined. My friend came back just then, and Barb acted like nothing had just happened. We had some new guys joined our group to flirt. I'm in a relationship, but my friend and Barb were not. By then, the second girl had left. Barb and my friend were starting to get pretty messed up. I went to use the bathroom and text my boyfriend that I was coming home soon, and saw that my phone was dead. When I came back, the guys had gotten us shots. I was still pretty sober and declined the shot. Barb shoved the shot into my hand, and to avoid a scene, I took it. I started to tell my friend I was heading home, but one look at her face and Barb, and I saw they were out of it. I was starting to feel pretty woozy myself, so I grabbed my things and their things and started shoving them to go. The guys that bought the shots were protesting, but I wasn't getting resistance from the girls. I hailed a cab. My phone was dead, so no Uber. And I remember putting the girls in the back and telling the driver that we were dropping off my friends at their house, then going to my address. Then we blacked out. I remember dropping off my friend, then a blackout. Then I was alone with that driver. I was in the front seat and he was holding my hand. I looked around, disoriented, took in the sight of him holding my hand while driving, like my boyfriend would. I saw my wallet in the center cup holder. The meter was off and was telling me that he was taking me to a romantic place. I told him no, please take me home. My boyfriend was waiting at home. He said something along the lines of, "Stop talking about him, I told you." Which to me in hindsight, indicates that I had told him already many times. He said he just wanted to pretend for a little and held my hand tighter. I didn't want to trigger a violent reaction, so I left my hand there and started to reach for my wallet with my other hand. He saw, let go of my hand, and took my wallet from the cup holder to his other side where I couldn't reach. I was still woozy and blacked out again. When I came to my senses, we were parked near a very known, romantic, and touristy location in my city. Normally this place is packed. Not that night. It's pretty far from anything else too, and surrounded by woods. I started to cry and tell him to please take me home. I want to see my boyfriend. I won't tell anyone. Please. He looked at me and said, I will take you home if you pretend you are my girlfriend for a little while. I sat there in shock. I wished my brain was addled. I wished I had never gone out. I wished I could see my boyfriend for the 1000th time that night. I said okay. He smiled, put my wallet back in the cup holder. I took it slowly and put it under my leg. He took my hand and looked out the front window out into the little lake he had brought me to. He started talking and I don't remember what he was saying. I was trying not to black out again. I waited for him to look at me and asked again, please take me home. He said if I let him give me a kiss. I said no. He looked mad for a fraction of a second and squeezed the hand he was still holding. He leaned in fast and kissed me anyway. I kept my lips sealed tight against him, ready to fight, ready to bite and scratch and not go down easy. He let go of my hand and backed away. We started the car and started our way back to civilization. I was crying silently as possible, trying not to be heard so he would forget I was there and want to touch me, hold my hand. I waited till we were near enough people that I could bolt out of the car and find another way home. I think he saw me grabbing my wallet from under my leg and knew my intention to jump out at the next red light. He snatched it again and said he would drive me. I just nodded, but by then I didn't care about the wallet, my phone, or anything else. I was going to jump out. No matter what, I was going to get home. I didn't know what time it was by then. I do know there was almost no cars driving in my usually busy city. No buses, no people. I didn't care anymore. He stopped at a red light. I unlocked the door and yanked it open and ran. I didn't look back, but I heard a car peel out of the intersection. He was running too. My phone still dead. No wallet, so no money. Really far from my house. I was still drowsy and crying. I had no idea of the time. I started walking home. I heard a car pull up near me and started running out of instinct. I heard a woman's voice yell out, "Are you okay?" I stopped and swirled around, and the most beautiful person I have ever seen in the world was walking towards me slowly, hands out in front of her as to not scare me. I started crying even harder, even more incoherent than I had ever been in my life. She hugged me so hard and asked for my boyfriend's number. She called him. He answered straight away. She started telling him where I was, that I was okay, that she was taking me home. I cried the whole way back, trying to explain what happened, but still woozy, still freaking out. It was hard. So we drove in relative silence. When we got home, my boyfriend was waiting outside, losing his mind. My savior gave me a phone number to call her when I felt better, and drove off. It was 5 a.m. I left the bar at 10 p.m. That's all I can remember. A week later, my wallet showed up in my mailbox. Lately, I've been noticing something off about home, like there's something else there with me. My wife, and our 2 dogs, but I have not been able to put my finger on it until today. For some context, I live in a duplex. We share the property with another guy in his mid-20s. He has his own house and we have ours, but we share the laundry room that leads to our respective backyards that are separated by a fence. This all started around 2 months ago when the guy sent me a text. "Hey man, just a heads up, someone stole my bike out of the sunroom." This is extra creepy because to get to our sun/laundry room, you would need to hop the brick fence surrounded by shrubby trees and then hurl the bike over. Unless the thief had the most massive pair of balls ever, and walked it out through one of our front doors when we weren't home. Either way, I didn't feel right and made more of an effort to keep the door locked. Fast forward to a couple of weeks ago. I let my dogs into the backyard and one of them starts sniffing at the shed. No big deal. The lizards are coming out with it heating up. They probably just chased one under the door. I finally got them to come in, but didn't give it much thought. I hardly ever go into that shed. Nothing wrong with it. It's just kind of out of the way, and I'm not really a hang out in the shed type of guy. So we generally use it for storage. Suitcases, furniture that doesn't fit/match the house, camping stuff, you know, boring suburban shit. We probably enter it maybe 3 times a year. After the 18th day in a row of my dogs being curious about the shed, I decided to have a little look-see to see if maybe there was a Komodo dragon or something in there since they wouldn't let this thing go. Nope, no Komodo. But what I did find literally made me piss myself just a little bit. Just a few drops. Inside the shed was the bike that my neighbor had stolen a little while back. My first thought was, oh fuck, my wife is a klepto. But quickly ruled that out. She doesn't even like to bike. Then I was briefly worried that my neighbor thought that I was the thief. I mean, it's in my shed. I don't know how to explain that if he found out. Plus I wanted to give him his bike back. I kept looking around and found one of our sleeping bags unraveled but balled up behind a box. Inside of it was a sack of what looked to be around $20 in change and singles. There was also a bag for garbage and it had lots of food wrappers inside. Eventually my brain accepted that it was ultimately denying it at first and put 2 and 2 together. Someone, I don't know who, was living in my shed. Or at least was. Maybe my dog spooked them off. Or maybe they sleep there every night and leave during the day. If they weren't coming back, why would they leave the change? I left everything how I found it and thinking about what I should do next. Whoever did it must have gotten in through the spare set of keys I keep hidden in my backyard. I looked up and brought them inside with me tonight. Hopefully whoever it is gets the message and moves on. I'm going to install cameras tomorrow. I'll keep you guys updated if anything more happens. Please hope for the best and that this person isn't a lunatic. Alright guys, I've got some good news and I've got some bad news. The bad news is that for 3 nights now, my cameras have not picked up anything. So no creepy footage for you guys. The good news for me? No footage. But the story doesn't end there. A few people who read my post suggested I contact some local homeless shelters. After all, I didn't want to get police involved and ruin someone's life potentially, and this very well could have just been a person who hit rock bottom and just needed any kind of shelter. So I called around these past few days and explained the story to some people who knew the homeless population. The first few conversations went something like this. Doesn't sound like anyone I know of, but let me hook you up with... fill in the blank here. After about the 5th or 6th time of telling to hit up someone who may know, I got a bite. Susan has been working with the homeless community in my city for 3 decades. She listened to what I had to say with eagerness, and I could tell she had a light bulb go off almost right away. That bag of food wrappers you found, were there a bunch of party mix little bite muffins? This was it. She was dead spot on. There were probably like 10 in there. You've got nothing to worry about. That's Old Man Dan. Susan proceeded to tell me the brief version of Old Man Dan's life. Old Man Dan is a supposed Vietnam veteran who, like many of his peers, fell on hard times. She said that he has probably lived more of his life homeless than he probably has functioning with society. They feel like he suffers from a multitude of mental health issues such as PTSD and multiple personality, but has never been a concern for violent outbursts. He has mostly kept his head low and just tried to hang out. He also has a habit for shoplifting boxes at a time of party mix, little bites from the grocery store. I guess they're his favorite. But Old Man Dan was infamous for one thing, setting up little bases around town. Some, they said, he's gone years undetected. Other times he's caught in a day. There are usually little bite wrappers around in these places. That's what usually gives his identity away. They said he's really good about not going back to where he's not welcome. He's just trying to not draw attention. Some of his local hideouts include under the bleachers at a high school, the away team's bench, less security, abandoned swimming pools, like one's swim teams would practice at. He had a tent on a golf course, but his most common are a plethora of sheds and guest houses he can find a way into. So now that I knew that my wife's life, my precious baby pups, my neighbors, and my life were not in any immediate threat, I took a moment to ponder and make my next move. I asked if Susan would come by and grab his stuff and track him down. She said she knew his usual spots. I tossed his trash. It was just wrappers, no cans or recyclables, but gave her the sack of cash and coins. Just a little extra from my coin jar too. I also let her give him the sleeping bag. My neighbor kept the bike. Anyway, hopefully that's the end of this saga. I'm moving this summer away, so not really anything to worry about long term. But although I knew his intentions aren't malicious, part of me still feels violated that this was even happening. How many nights did he sleep out there without me knowing? I shudder at the thought. This happened about 7 years ago, in the summer of 2014. I went to a local college for a few years, and my two friends were back in town for the summer. All of our parents were home that night, so the three of us decided to drive around looking for a place to chill and smoke a bowl. We stopped at a local park right off the main road, pulling up this windy gravel road into an empty parking lot. It was a soccer field, so it was pretty open, and the field was surrounded by a tree line. We got out and walked a little ways into the field, probably about 150 feet from the car, and started smoking and chatting. Now this area is close to a pretty big airport, so there are always planes flying by, and this night was no different. At this point, it was around 9:30 to 10, so it was dark out. After less than 10 minutes, we saw another car's headlights pull up the gravel road and into the parking lot. I noticed it was a pickup. It parked right next to my friend's car. The three of us didn't really know what to do and just kind of looked at each other. We looked very conspicuous and were a bit worried someone had come to kick us out. The park was closed. The car turned off, and two people got out and started walking towards us. We decided to just play it cool. They walked right up to us. They were a man and a woman who looked like they were in their late 50s, early 60s. The man wasn't wearing a shirt and had cargo shorts on and was wearing glasses. The woman was paler. She had blonde hair that was a little scraggly, and she also looked like she was wearing glasses. But it was hard to tell, and they probably didn't have as thick frames as the man. It was dark, so I didn't get a good look at them, even though they were right next to us. The man said, "What's up? Are you here to see the lights?" No idea what that means. We mumbled, "What do you mean, the lights?" "The lights," he said. "They're all over. Can't you see them?" He pointed at the sky, and I realized he was talking about the stars. "They're everywhere tonight. Look at the planes. They can't even get into the sky." As he was talking, he was looking at the sky, and he would just randomly get excited and shout, "Look, there's one now." We looked up and just saw some planes taking off and landing. He was in utter amazement. He looked like he was breathless with wonder, and he started wandering off by himself with his hands on his head, looking at the sky and muttering. The woman stayed with us and started talking about how they've been tracking this movement for months. "Those stars are angels," she said. "They're getting stronger and stronger, which is why the planes are being forced to land." According to her, this night was the most active they've ever been. After a couple minutes, which lined up pretty well with the woman's story, the man returned. He said, "You know what this means, right? Jesus is coming back. His angels are getting ready. The planes are already going haywire and are falling out of the sky." They were looking at the sky and kept pointing out planes that would fly by the stars. All of them, because there were a lot of stars out. When a plane would pass by a bright star, they would get really excited and act like the pilot just escaped death. So the three of us are a bit freaked out. They seemed pretty interested in the sky, so after a pause, my friend piped up and said we should get going because it's getting late. They exchanged friendly goodbyes with us. I shook the man's hand, and the lady leans in to hug me. And I'm just like, okay, sure. And then she kisses me on the cheek. I got a pretty good look at her then, and I realized that she wasn't wearing glasses. And she had some of the most wild-looking eyes I've ever seen. Open really wide with this piercing stare. They were like a bright blue, almost silver. Just a very, very strange vibe. That little part stayed with me the most. But we left them in the field and walked back to the car, making sure they were still in the field on the way. We were quiet until we got back onto the main road, and then just said, what the fuck was that? I had the feeling they were some kind of doomsday preppers or part of some fundamentalist sect, and that the man was probably on psychedelics. The woman was more lucid. I hope she was the one that drove. It didn't seem aggressive or like they wanted to harm us, but also a little unpredictable. So, this happened roughly about 2 years ago. I worked at a hotel which had 50 rooms between 3 floors. I was the only employee in the building after about 5 p.m. It should be noted I am a girl. The hotel is on the farther side of the city, but it's considered to be on the nicer side. So a lot of companies will send their workers to us for room and board, instead of the shadier motels on the opposite side of the city. Some of them were great guests. Others completely trashed everything, but that happens everywhere, I suppose. The layout of the building was pretty simple. You pull up the front entrance, enter the foyer, and the front desk/lobby is right through a set of automatic doors. Right across the hall from the lobby was a staircase leading up to the second floor, and to the left was our elevators to the second and third floor. The first floor only has rooms on one side, to compensate for our pool, workout room, and breakfast area/dining room. Lobby and the office rooms all being on the opposite side. The upper floors have rooms on each side, with the third floor having the most rooms. Typically the third floor, the highest, we kept only for business and long stays. Second floor was reserved for short stays or bigger parties. And the first floor we kept open for elders who have wheelchairs or walkers, or people who come in late at night for a one-night stay. I promise this is relevant to the story. Anyway, it was getting towards the last few hours of my shift. It was slow that night. Aside from a few work groups I had checked in a few hours earlier, I noticed a raggedy, rusted, and beat-up black pickup truck pulling up into the brightly lit car pit, so I got my paperwork ready for check-in. A guy gets out, completely covered in dirt. I figured he'd just got off of work, as most guys come in covered in dirt or oil. I do specifically remember that he reeked, which isn't too out of the norm either. Entirely, I just chalked it up to him being an oil field or construction worker. I got his credentials. His name was Michael, and scanned it into the computer. He also was reluctant to leave his vehicle information with me, but I explained if he didn't, his vehicle was at risk of being towed by morning. I thought he caved because he was only going to be there for the night. Michael requested a second floor room close to the lobby staircase so he could have easy access to the front doors for smoking. Not out of the norm either. After taking his payment, I set up his room keys. I explained parking, policies, and explained how he can get to his own room, which was right up the staircase, and the door was on the opposite wall. He had a few bags with him, and he went upstairs. Almost immediately he comes back down the stairs and accuses me of giving him broken room keys. I had to explain if he put them next to his phone, or anywhere near a magnet, potentially in his wallet, the keys will deactivate. I did offer to take him upstairs and open the room for him to make sure the new set of keys worked. And they did. He walked into his room by himself, shut the door. So with that, I was on my way back down to the lobby. When I got back in the office, something odd caught my eye on the cameras. He hadn't left the building, but his car wasn't in the front anymore. He didn't mention anything about having another person with him. If there was, we are supposed to charge a $10 fee per person. The side doors don't open unless you have a room key, or are on the inside of the hotel, so I started to watch the cameras and make sure he wasn't trying to sneak people in. About 20 minutes passed and I noticed nothing happening except him coming down the stairs. I smile politely and he goes outside. He stays outside for about 10 minutes, just standing in the carport. I can see it on camera. Now, while I thought that was a little weird, I just chalked it up to him taking a smoke. I stopped paying attention after a while and started to file my paperwork that was due before my shift ended. Michael ran back into the hotel, cigarette still in his mouth. I instructed him he must take his cigarette outside and put it out. I told him prior we do not allow smoking inside the building. He just threw it on the ground and put it out with his shoe. He turned his attention towards the TV and ended up sitting in the lobby for an ungodly amount of time. He kept glancing towards the door, which made me uncomfortable. During this time, the friendly demeanor he had at check-in completely disappeared. He seemed paranoid and agitated now. He would whisper to himself. I couldn't hear what. After about 30 minutes of him doing this, I instructed him to go back up to his room because I cannot have people in the lobby where I am working on closing procedures. It was a lie, but ownership allows us to make up reasons if we are uncomfortable with the guest presence. Michael asked me to take him up to his room because he is uncomfortable and scared. I explained that I am unable to do that for safety reasons. What I could do is watch him go up the stairs on camera, and he could call down to the office on his room phone when he arrived into his room. I was just trying to be friendly and get him upstairs as quick as I could. He goes upstairs, but immediately comes back down and informs me that he forgot where his room was and I would need to show him. I told him I can't leave the office or lobby, but I can explain it to him where his room was because it was super simple. He was continuing his whispers. This time it was about him losing his phone. I didn't pay any mind to it. After explaining to Michael where his room was, he went back upstairs and I heard the door slam shut. It echoed throughout the second and first floors and it gave me chills for some reason. Almost immediately, he comes back down and starts yelling at me, telling me I stole his cell phone, that I'm planning his demise and I need to find his phone. This was completely bogus as I haven't left the office since making sure his room key worked. He asked me for help and I just wanted him to go away, so I slipped a screwdriver in my pocket just in case he tried to attack me, and I began rummaging through the lobby couches looking for his phone. I didn't find it, but I did find his credit card, which he also began accusing me of stealing. I stood my ground and said if he can't respect me in my place of work, I can call the police and request they escort him into his room, or off the facility. He got angrier, snatched his card from my hands, and went back outside. After about 20 more minutes, he comes back inside. He is calmer, but he asks if I would please go outside with him because there is something wrong with his car. After I absolutely refuse, he tells me that I need to go outside, that it's not fair he's the only person out there working on his car and he just needs some fucking help. I had to explain I am not allowed to accompany a guest outsider of the building. He just starts repeating that I absolutely have to go outside with him. Now, I have anxiety, and I tend to let my mind roam over wide horizons, and this was no different. I was about to have a panic attack, so I called the owners and asked them what I should do. It was my first hotel job, and although I have tons of freedom doing my job, I still want to know how to properly handle these situations. The owner told me if I am uncomfortable and suspect he is under the influence or a danger to myself or himself, I have full reign to call the police, have them ban him from the property. I asked if they could just keep an eye on the cameras they have access to at home because he is acting weird. I locked all the lobby doors and made sure the side and fire exits were all properly secured and closed so no one could sneak in. I did this while doing this on the phone with my boss because I was scared to leave the office by myself. After getting back behind the office, I locked the door and I just braced for him to come back inside. My boss tells me to just watch the cameras and keep my cell phone nearby just in case I have to call for help. Meanwhile, I noticed on the cameras I couldn't see Michael anymore. I don't know where he parked, but I damn sure wasn't going to go looking. But what I did notice is there was another vehicle driving through our parking lot. I called the hotel next door to ask if the car was on their cameras too, and I was informed it was an unknown vehicle to their records. It was unknown to mine as well. This just shot up my anxiety even harder. The car would drive around the back of the building, to the front, but avoid the carport, turn, and then do the same to the building next door. The parking lot was almost empty, so I know they weren't looking for a parking spot. The car keeps going, and I'm watching it on the camera so focused that I didn't notice Michael came back inside. Telling Michael he either needs to go up to his room or vacate the premises. He just continues to yell at me saying I need to go outside with him. He won't move out from in front of the entrance. I imagine he was staying within view of whoever else he kept looking back at. Then randomly, I see him sprint across the parking lot and out of the camera view. I also didn't see the car anymore after that. Since it was practically the end of my shift, I somehow managed to get everything done just in time for the next shift to arrive. I was so glad to see her I almost cried. I explained to her what happened and that the owners want to keep the lobby door closed and locked. We put up signs explaining our doors were broken, and due to safety reasons, guests would have to call for entry or use the side entrances for their room. I also deactivated Michael's room keys and told the next shift girl not to let him back. If he shows up, to call the police because he is a security risk. I made sure she watched me get into my Uber ride. After triple checking the vehicle and driver matched that my phone said. Since I was a regular customer of the driver, he asked why I was so riled up. I asked him to drive through the parking lot with his doors closed so I could see if Michael's truck or the other vehicle I saw driving across the parking lot were anywhere near the buildings. And they weren't. I have no idea what happened to them. The next day I had my boyfriend come stay the entire evening shift with me just in case he came back. Because I was told by my bosses that he never came to get his stuff. He wouldn't pick up the phone for calls either. Nothing happened that night, or any other night. Except for a month later, Michael came in asking about his stuff and if he could get a room. I refused his room and luckily other people were there with me in the lobby and in the office. I had our maintenance man go to retrieve his items and explained he is no longer allowed on the property. If we saw him, the police would be called and he would be arrested for trespassing. Again, this wasn't true, but we didn't want him coming back at all. I noticed Michael had a different vehicle this time. It was a newer model SUV, and it was maroon. It matched neither his beat-up black pickup truck or the dark-colored sedan I saw driving in circles. If there was anything that sat with me even after all this time, it was that he remembered my name. He addressed me by my name when he walked up to the counter. And at first I thought, oh yeah, my name is part of my uniform. Until I realized I forgot to put on my name tag that day. After that, I refused to wear one in the hotel. Management let me create a fake name and wear that from that point on. It took me a while to feel safe in the building again while I was alone. I constantly had my boyfriend with me while I worked the evening shift. There is a chance the guy and the circling vehicle are unrelated. But my anxiety and the aura I got from Michael that night, it didn't feel good or right. Back in July 2018, me and my 3 best friends decided to go on a vacation to Barcelona. The 4 of us, all females, were 18 at the time and had just finished our freshman year of college. For context, we had planned this trip for several months, but the lazy asses that we were took our time before booking our flights and Airbnb. We eventually started our search in May, and if you have ever been to Barcelona, You might know it's already pretty late if you want to find an affordable and well-located summer accommodation. We ended up scrolling on several websites for days as everything was way out of our budget. One of my friends finally found this very decent studio located near the Ramblas, a very touristy neighborhood. The condo was actually located on a narrow street that was perpendicular to the main Rambla. You had to walk about 500 meters, or 0.3 miles, until you arrived at the sketchier end of this street, where the flat was. It really didn't bother us as the building was pretty secure. You had to open the first front door that led to the streets. Then you had to take the stairs to the second floor, where you had a second door which required another key. This second door led to 3 condos, so we had a third and final key to our personal flat. The final door did not have any outside handle, which meant that if we were to leave without our keys, we would end up locked out. There was finally no outside handle on the balcony door either. You could only open the door from the inside. It might seem like a lot of details, but it's important for what comes next. The day we checked in, we were pretty excited despite our terrible exhaustion. We had been traveling for 15 hours at that point, so we decided to go smoke a cigarette on the balcony. The balcony next to ours belonged to our next door neighbors, who were a bunch of Italian boys who we only met at this very moment. They had been pretty loud throughout the stay, but we've never thought too much of it. As last elements of context, our condo was disposed as follows. The front door led to the main room, which is where 2 of my friends were sleeping. The bed was on the left, and at the end of the room was the living room, which also worked as a kitchen and a bedroom. The sofa was foldable, where my third friend and I were sleeping. We were there for 5 nights. As the young women that we were, our daily routine was pretty consistent. We would go clubbing every night, go home at around 4 a.m., pass out in our beds and wake up at 11. We'd visit the city up until 7 p.m. and then get ready to repeat. Our first 3 nights were awesome. We had some male friends who were staying in Barcelona too, so we'd meet up with them and it was fun. Yet the 4th night was rather creepy. We had gone home at 4 a.m., screwed around with my friends for another hour, and fell asleep by 5. Around 7:30, my friend who was sleeping with me in the living room, and who suffers from sleep paralysis, wakes up as she feels something tickling her ankle. She opens her eyes and sees someone crouching at the end of the bed, his hand on her ankle, as if he was looking for something under the bed. At this moment, she is convinced that she's experiencing sleep paralysis again, but the fear makes her sit on the bed and shout, "What the fuck?" Which rarely happens with sleep paralysis, as your muscles are often numb. The shouting wakes me up. I see the guy too, at the end of the bed, and, still half asleep, I whisper, "Edward?" I think I had been dreaming about a friend of mine and confused this guy with him. The guy gets scared, suddenly gets up, stares at us, and then tiptoes away saying, "Oops, oops, oops." He walks back past the bed where my friends are dead asleep, and walks out the front door. My friend and I stayed up for a long time talking about what we had just experienced. Then we woke the other girls up and told them the story. We never knew how this guy broke into our flat. He didn't steal anything, even though we had ostentatiously left our credit cards, IDs, phones, and cash on the table. The only thing is that night, we did not lock the front door, but it was closed, so normally no one could open it as there was no handle, unless someone had a key. We chose not to talk to the police about it because of this, as they could have told us that we were responsible for not locking the door properly. We also chose not to tell the landlord for the same reason, but also because we didn't want to ruin our last day there. We tried contacting our neighbors, the Italian guys, went to their flat and knocked, but they never opened the door. Looking back at it, we should have definitely done something about it, and we shouldn't have stayed there for another minute. But we were too young, I guess. We could never figure what the guy wanted, nor what he was looking for under the bed. None of this makes sense, to be fair. Why would someone come to someone's place, uninvited, to look for something at 7:30 while the occupants are asleep? I guess we'll never know.